Naomi Green adjusted her camera strap nervously as she stood in the crowded plaza outside the red carpet event. Bright lights flashed, music played, and fans screamed as celebrities walked by, waving and smiling. For Naomi, this wasn't just an event. It was her chance to meet Graham Sterling, her favorite actor. She'd grown up admiring his work, memorizing his lines, and even dreaming of directing a movie he would star in one day. "Excuse me, coming through," Naomi whispered as she weaved through the bustling crowd of fans. She clutched a poster from Graham's latest movie in her hand, her heart pounding with excitement and nerves. Finally, she saw him. Graham Sterling was taller than she'd imagined, with a sharp suit and a confident smile that made the cameras love him. He waved at the crowd, his sparkling charisma drawing everyone's attention. Naomi hesitated, wondering if she should wait or just go for it. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling," she called out timidly. Her voice was almost drowned by the noise around her. To her surprise, he turned toward her. For a moment, she felt like the luckiest person in the world. "Hi," she said quickly, holding out the poster and a pen. "I'm a huge fan. Could I get your autograph?" Graham glanced at her, his smile fading slightly. He scanned her from head to toe, then let out a small, almost inaudible sigh. "Not today," he said dismissively, waving her off. Naomi felt her heart drop, but she tried to stay polite. "Oh, it would only take a second," she said, her voice still hopeful. That's when Graham leaned in closer, his voice low but sharp. "You're wasting my time, sweetheart. Go bother someone else," he said, loud enough for a few people nearby to hear. Naomi froze, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The crowd around them began murmuring, and a few people even laughed awkwardly. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the ground and escape the humiliation. Graham straightened up, putting on his dazzling smile again as he turned back to the cameras, acting as if nothing had happened. Naomi stepped back, clutching her unsigned poster. The hurt stung more than she expected. She'd looked up to him for years, and in just a few seconds, he'd crushed that admiration. As she walked away from the red carpet, her disappointment turned into something else. Determination. Naomi had always been a dreamer, but now she felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about Graham Sterling anymore. It was about proving to herself and the world that she could succeed despite the odds. She didn't know how or when, but she promised herself one thing. She would make it in the film industry, and one day Graham Sterling would have to see her not as a fan, but as someone he couldn't ignore. As the lights of the red carpet faded behind her, Naomi gripped her camera tightly, her heart still heavy, but her spirit unbroken. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to take the first step. After the humiliating encounter with Graham Sterling, Naomi found herself at a crossroads. She could have given up. Many others would have. But Naomi wasn't like most people. Instead of letting the hurt sink deep, she turned it into fuel to chase her dreams. Naomi had always been passionate about film. From a young age, she would watch movies and imagine herself behind the camera, creating the stories that could make people laugh, cry, and think. But growing up in a small town, there wasn't much support for those kinds of dreams. As a black woman, she was often told that the world of movies wasn't a place for her, either because of her race or because of her gender. The film industry, like so many others, had a reputation for being tough and sometimes even unfair. But Naomi wasn't discouraged. She knew that the road to success wouldn't be easy. After her encounter with Graham, she decided to pursue film school. She worked hard, studied late into the night, and did whatever she could to learn about the craft. Film school wasn't perfect, and neither was the support she received there. Sometimes professors overlooked her, assuming she wasn't as capable as the others. Naomi didn't give up, though. She made sure her work stood out, showing everyone that she had the talent, creativity, and drive to succeed. After finishing film school, Naomi faced even more challenges. She had to start from the very bottom, working as a production assistant on a variety of movie sets. The pay wasn't great, the hours were long, and the work was often grueling. But Naomi didn't mind. Every day, she watched the directors, the cameramen, and the actors. She learned everything she could from them, even though many of her coworkers treated her as just another nameless assistant. Her experiences on set weren't always easy. There were moments of frustration when her ideas were dismissed or ignored because of her race or her age. Sometimes she overheard jokes or comments that made her feel small. But Naomi held her head high. She kept working, kept learning, and most importantly, she kept dreaming. She knew that the path she had chosen wouldn't be kind to her, but that didn't matter. She wasn't going to let anyone stop her. Slowly but surely, Naomi started to build a reputation. She began making a name for herself as a hardworking and talented assistant director. Her creativity shone through, and people began to take notice. One of the indie films she worked on unexpectedly became a hit. It was a small-budget film, but it had a big heart, and Naomi's creative input had made it shine. The film critics noticed her work, and soon Naomi's name was being talked about in circles where she'd once been invisible. One evening, Naomi received a call that changed everything. An up-and-coming studio, impressed by her work on the indie film, offered her a chance to direct her own feature film. It was a huge opportunity, and though it came with its own set of challenges, Naomi knew this was her moment. As she hung up the phone, Naomi smiled. It wasn't just a call for a new job. It was a step towards something bigger. The journey was far from over, but Naomi had come a long way. She was no longer just a hopeful dreamer. She was a director, and she was about to prove to the world, and to Graham Sterling, that she had what it took to succeed. The phone call was a turning point for Naomi. She had worked for years, facing every challenge, every obstacle, and now she had a chance to direct her own feature film. It felt surreal. The studio was offering her a big-budget movie with a major cast, something that most filmmakers only dream of. This was her moment, but even as excitement filled her heart, a part of her was still cautious. She knew that this opportunity wasn't going to be handed to her without a fight. Naomi stood in front of her mirror, taking a deep breath. She had come so far, but the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Being a black woman in Hollywood meant that people would doubt her abilities, and she was sure there would be those who expected her to fail. But she wasn't afraid. She knew what she was capable of. She immediately got to work, assembling her team. The studio wanted a director with a vision, someone who could bring their script to life. Naomi had spent years watching, learning, and perfecting her own ideas. She knew exactly how she wanted the film to feel, to look, and to move. This was her chance to show the world who she was as a filmmaker. The script was an action-packed story about a young hero on a journey to save their world. It had the kind of big-budget spectacle that would capture audiences, but Naomi saw it as something deeper. There was an underlying message of hope, courage, and resilience that she believed in. It was a story that could inspire people, just like she had been inspired by films growing up. Naomi's first challenge was the casting. She knew that the right actors would make or break the film. After some meetings, Naomi was given a list of potential stars to consider, and there, at the top of the list, was Graham Sterling. He was still a household name, known for his action roles and charismatic performances, but Naomi remembered him, the man who had refused to sign her poster all those years ago. His face was still fresh in her mind. At first, she hesitated. She thought about the humiliating moment on the red carpet and how it had felt to be dismissed by someone she had admired. But she wasn't going to let her personal feelings interfere with the work she had to do. Naomi needed the best actor for the role, and Graham was a talented professional. She put her emotions aside and decided to move forward with him, knowing she had to keep things professional. As soon as Graham arrived for the first meeting, Naomi could sense his surprise. He didn't expect her to be the director. She could see the flash of confusion in his eyes when he realized the woman he had brushed off years ago was now in charge. But Naomi didn't let it faze her. She welcomed him with a firm handshake and a confident smile. "Mr. Sterling, I'm glad you're here," Naomi said, her voice calm but firm. "We have a lot of work to do." Graham, still clearly stunned, nodded. "Of course, Ms. Green," he said, his tone a little forced, but Naomi could tell he was starting to respect her. She was no longer the star-struck fan she had once been. Now she was a director, a leader, and she was determined to make this film a success. She had worked too hard to let anything or anyone stand in her way. As the cast and crew gathered, Naomi felt a sense of pride. She had earned her place in this room, and no one was going to take that from her. The film would be her vision. And no matter what happened, Naomi Green was finally ready to show the world what she could do. Naomi was on a roll. She had brought her vision to life, gathered a talented cast and crew, and was feeling more confident with each passing day. But when it came time to select the lead actor, she faced her first real challenge. The studio executives were eager to move forward with the film. They had seen Naomi's previous work, and they liked her ideas. But when it came to casting, they had a different opinion. They wanted a bankable star, someone with a large fan following who could bring in a crowd. They made it clear that they wanted Graham Sterling as the lead. Naomi felt a wave of mixed emotions. She knew that Graham was an experienced actor, someone who could bring a certain energy to the role. But she also knew the history between them. Could she really work with him? Could she put aside the pain of that humiliating encounter at the red carpet event? More importantly, could she lead him with the respect she had earned, despite the way he had treated her? The studio didn't leave her with much of a choice. They were already set on Graham for the role. Naomi didn't want to fight them too hard. After all, this was her first major project, and she needed to prove that she could make decisions that would ensure the film's success. As Naomi walked into the meeting with the studio heads, her mind raced. She needed to make sure the film stayed true to her vision, but she also didn't want to make any waves. She had learned early on that the film industry wasn't always kind to those who challenged authority. "I understand the need for a big name in the lead role," Naomi said, keeping her tone calm and professional. "But I want to make sure the actor who takes on this role truly embodies the character. It's not just about star power, it's about the story." The studio heads nodded but didn't seem convinced. "Naomi, we've seen the script, and we know the character's potential. Graham has the star quality to bring in an audience. That's what this film needs." Naomi knew they were right about one thing. Graham was a big name, and he had the kind of presence that could elevate the film. After a long silence, she took a deep breath and agreed. "All right," Naomi said, her voice steady. "I'll work with him, but I want full creative control over how the character is developed. He needs to understand the depth of this role." The decision was made. Naomi would direct Graham, and she was determined to ensure that he would be more than just a face on the poster. This was her chance to prove that she could work with even the most difficult of actors and still deliver a film that was true to her vision. As Naomi left the meeting, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't care if Graham had been rude to her years ago. She wasn't the same person anymore. She was the director now, and no one, not even Graham Sterling, was going to take that away from her. When Graham walked onto set for the first time, Naomi stood tall and greeted him with a firm handshake. There was no hint of resentment in her voice, just professionalism. "Let's make this movie a success, Mr. Sterling," she said, her eyes locking with his. "I'm counting on you." And for the first time, Naomi felt like she truly had the power to make her dreams come true. The first day of filming arrived. Naomi stood on the set, taking in the sight of the large crew bustling around, setting up lights and cameras, and preparing for the big scene. She felt the familiar rush of excitement and nerves that always came with the start of a new project. But this time, the stakes were higher. This was her film, her direction, and her vision. And the actor standing in front of her was none other than Graham Sterling, the same man who had once dismissed her so coldly at that red carpet event. Graham was standing with the other actors, chatting with the crew, his usual confident self. Naomi observed him quietly, feeling a mixture of emotions. She had put aside her personal feelings for the sake of the film, but it wasn't easy. Every time she saw him, she remembered how he had acted toward her all those years ago. Still, she had a job to do, and she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. Naomi took a deep breath and walked toward him. As she approached, Graham turned to face her, his expression a bit surprised. It had been years since their first encounter, and he had no idea what to expect from her now. Naomi knew this moment was important. She had to show him that things had changed. She was no longer a starstruck fan, but a professional in charge of the set. "Mr. Sterling," she said, offering a polite but firm handshake. "I'm glad you're here. We have a lot of work to do." Graham looked at her for a moment, clearly caught off guard by her calm demeanor. He hesitated but then shook her hand. "Of course, Ms. Green. I'm looking forward to it." There was a moment of awkward silence between them, but Naomi didn't let it faze her. She was the director now, and she had to set the tone from the very start. She briefed Graham on the scene they were about to film, explaining her vision for the character and the emotion she wanted him to bring to life. She noticed that Graham listened carefully, nodding as she spoke. He wasn't interrupting or acting dismissive. It seemed like he was taking her seriously for the first time. As the scene began, Naomi watched closely. She had given Graham a complex role, a character who struggled with guilt but found redemption in the end. It was a challenging part, one that required both emotional depth and strength. Naomi had faith in Graham's abilities, but she wasn't going to let him coast through just because of his star power. She was here to make sure the performance was as real as it could be. The cameras rolled, and Graham began his performance. At first, he seemed stiff, trying to stick to the script and his usual acting habits. Naomi knew this was the moment to step in. She approached him gently, giving him a note on his next take. "Try to feel the weight of the character's past," Naomi suggested, her voice calm but filled with authority. "Let it come from within, not just from what you've memorized. This moment has to feel real." Graham looked at her, and for the first time, Naomi saw a shift in his expression. He nodded, taking her advice to heart. As the next take began, something changed. Graham's performance grew more natural, more raw. The emotion in his eyes was undeniable. Naomi felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. As the day went on, Naomi could see that Graham was starting to respect her as a director. His previous arrogance seemed to fade, replaced by a willingness to listen and collaborate. Naomi could feel the power shift on set. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She wasn't just a fan. She was the one calling the shots. By the end of the day, Naomi felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had stood her ground. She had proven that she could work with anyone, even Graham Sterling. And the film, her film, was beginning to take shape in ways she had only dreamed of. As the days passed, Naomi settled into her role as the director, and the film began to take shape. Each scene was more challenging than the last, but Naomi felt her confidence grow with every take. The crew had started to respect her as the leader, and the cast followed her direction. But the most surprising development was the change in Graham Sterling. The actor who had once dismissed her with arrogance now seemed to be listening more carefully to her instructions. It was as if a shift had taken place. He was beginning to see her not as the young fan, but as a serious professional. At first, Naomi wasn't sure what had sparked this change in Graham. Maybe it was the fact that she had earned the respect of the crew, or perhaps it was the way she had guided him through the emotional depth of his role. Whatever it was working. Slowly, Graham seemed to be shedding his old behavior. He wasn't perfect, and there were still moments where his ego crept through, but Naomi could see the difference. During one particularly intense scene, where Graham's character had to confront his past mistakes, Naomi felt the weight of the moment. She watched as Graham prepared for the take, pacing back and forth, clearly deep in thought. Naomi could sense that he was struggling to tap into the raw emotion the scene demanded. She knew this was going to be a challenge for him. She walked over to him, her footsteps light but firm. "Graham," she said softly, making sure he could hear her, "this scene is about letting go of the past. You have to feel the weight of your character's regrets, but also the hope that comes with letting them go. It's not about acting angry or sad. It's about feeling it." Graham looked at her, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. He nodded, but Naomi could see the doubt in his eyes. "I'll try," he said quietly. Naomi didn't walk away. Instead, she stood beside him, watching him carefully. She understood that sometimes actors needed to feel supported in those vulnerable moments. "You've got this," she said, offering a reassuring smile. "Just breathe and let it out." The next take was a breakthrough. Graham, once so guarded and distant, let his emotions pour out. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, and his voice cracked with the weight of the character's pain. Naomi watched in awe as the scene unfolded before her. It wasn't just good, it was real. The kind of performance that could move an audience. As the take ended, Graham stood still for a moment, almost as if he were processing what had just happened. Then he looked at Naomi, his expression different. Gone was the prideful actor who had once brushed her off. Now, there was a quiet understanding between them. "Thank you," Graham said, his voice quieter than usual. That really helped." Naomi nodded, feeling a sense of pride swell within her. This wasn't just about directing a film. It was about helping someone else grow too. She had managed to break through the wall Graham had put up, and in doing so, she had helped him become a better actor. Over the following weeks, Naomi's leadership only grew stronger. The crew respected her, the cast trusted her, and Graham, once her greatest challenge, had become one of her greatest allies. They worked together, learning from each other, building the film piece by piece. Naomi had proven, not just to Graham, but to everyone on set, that she was in charge. She was no longer the assistant, and she was no longer the fan. She was the director, and she had earned her place. The power dynamics had shifted, and now Naomi was in control of her own destiny. As the filming continued, Naomi felt the weight of her responsibilities growing. She was no longer just the director of a film. She was the leader of a project that could make or break her career. Every decision she made had consequences. Every scene, every take, was a chance to prove herself. The pressure was heavy, but Naomi was used to hard work. She had already overcome so much to get here, and she wasn't about to back down now. But the most difficult challenge of all came in the form of Graham Sterling's character. He was supposed to be the hero of the story, a flawed man who needed to redeem himself. But as the days passed, Naomi noticed that Graham was struggling to fully understand the complexity of the character. There were moments when he slipped back into old habits, relying on his usual charm and arrogance instead of the emotional depth the role required. Naomi couldn't afford to let this happen. She knew that if the film was going to succeed, Graham had to give his best performance. And for that, he needed to connect with his character on a deeper level. Naomi had already seen a glimpse of what he could do. She remembered the breakthrough moment when Graham had finally allowed his emotions to show. But now he was slipping back into his old ways. One evening, after a particularly tough day of filming, Naomi sat down with Graham. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but she also saw the determination. He was still trying, but she could tell that he needed a push, something to help him get back on track. "Graham," Naomi said softly, sitting across from him. "I know you can do this. You've shown me that you have the depth for this role. But I need you to really let go of everything else. Forget the persona you've built over the years. This character isn't about being charming or the star. It's about vulnerability. It's about being human." Graham looked at her, his expression a mixture of frustration and doubt. "I don't know if I can do that," he admitted quietly. "I spent so long building this image, this identity as a tough guy. Letting all that go, it's harder than it seems." Naomi nodded, understanding. She knew how difficult it could be to break free from the roles people expected of you, but she also knew that this was his chance for real growth. You don't have to do it all at once, Naomi said gently. Take it step by step. But trust me, when you let yourself be vulnerable, that's when you'll find the truth of your character. And that's when this film will truly come alive. There was a long pause as Graham considered her words. Naomi could see that something was starting to click in his mind. It wasn't easy, but he seemed to understand what she was asking of him. The next day, as they began filming a key scene, the one where Graham's character finally confronts his past mistakes, Naomi could see a difference. He was no longer trying to act the part. Instead, he was feeling the character's pain, his regret, and his hope for redemption. His eyes were full of emotion, and his voice cracked with raw honesty. As the scene ended, Naomi felt a surge of relief and pride. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. Graham had finally let go of his ego and found the heart of the character. His performance was powerful, genuine, and moving. Naomi knew they were on the right track. This wasn't just a victory for the film. It was a victory for Graham, too. He had faced his own fears and doubts, and in doing so, he had redeemed himself as both an actor and a person. The film was no longer just a job for Naomi. It had become a journey of self-discovery for both her and Graham, and together, they had turned their challenges into triumphs. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, Naomi felt certain that they could finish strong. She had helped Graham find his redemption, and in doing so, she had found her own. After weeks of filming, the movie was finally complete. Naomi stood backstage at the premiere, her heart racing as the lights dimmed. The theater was packed with critics, industry professionals, and fans, people who had come to see the film that had taken so much of her time, energy, and passion. This was her moment. The film, her vision, was about to be shown to the world. She could hear the soft murmur of the crowd as they settled into their seats, waiting for the show to begin. Naomi tried to steady her nerves, but it was hard to ignore the excitement in the air. This wasn't just any film. It was her first big project, and every detail mattered. She had poured her heart into it, and now it was time for the world to see what she had created. The screen flickered to life, and the opening scene began. Naomi watched from the side, her eyes fixed on the screen. She had already seen the film countless times during editing, but this was different. This was the final version, the one that would be judged by everyone. She could see the actors she had worked with so closely, the set pieces she had carefully chosen, the music that had been perfectly timed. It all came together in ways she had dreamed of, but could never have imagined. As the story unfolded on the screen, Naomi felt a wave of pride wash over her. The film was more than just a collection of scenes. It was a reflection of everything she had been through, everything she had fought for. It was about overcoming obstacles, about redemption, about finding strength in the face of adversity. The themes she had written into the script were alive, breathing, and speaking to the audience. When the credits rolled, the theater erupted into applause. Naomi's chest swelled with relief and joy. She had done it. The film was a success. The cast, the crew, and the audience all seemed to agree. It was everything she had hoped for, and more. Naomi walked up to the front of the theater as the applause continued, her eyes shining with pride. She was greeted with hugs and congratulations from the crew and the actors, including Graham. He was standing there, his usual confident smile now softened with genuine respect. "You did it, Naomi," Graham said, his voice full of admiration. "This film is incredible. I couldn't have asked for a better director." Naomi smiled, but she didn't have words for how much it meant to hear that from him. She had seen Graham struggle throughout the filming process, but he had pushed through and given a performance that had blown everyone away. He had found the heart of his character, and it had made all the difference. The critics' reviews came in soon after the premiere, and they were overwhelmingly positive. Naomi's name was on the lips of everyone in Hollywood. The film wasn't just a hit, it was a game changer. People were talking about the fresh perspective she brought to the industry, the way she had handled the big-budget film with such grace and creativity. She was no longer just the assistant, the hopeful dreamer. Naomi was a director in her own right. As the weeks went by, Naomi was offered more opportunities, but the most meaningful moment came when she received a call from the studio. They wanted her to direct another film, a sequel to the one she had just completed. It was a huge offer, and Naomi knew it was only the beginning. She had come a long way from the young woman who had once been humiliated by Graham Sterling. Now she was the one calling the shots. The industry was finally recognizing her for the talent and vision she had always known she had. Standing there, in the center of the room, Naomi realized that this was more than just a career success. It was a victory for every person who had ever been told they couldn't achieve their dreams. She had proven that with hard work, resilience, and belief in herself, anything was possible. And as Naomi looked around at the people who had helped her get here, she knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. Naomi stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out at the city lights below. It was late, but she wasn't tired. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, and she still felt like she was floating on air. Her first big film was a success, and she had just signed a deal for a new project. She had worked so hard to get here, and now it was all coming together. But it wasn't just the success of the film that filled her with pride. It was the journey. Naomi thought back to the young woman who had stood outside that red carpet event years ago, hoping to get an autograph from her favorite actor, Graham Sterling. Back then, she had felt small, dismissed, and unsure of herself. But now, she was standing at the top of her career, a respected director with the future ahead of her. As Naomi reflected on how far she had come, she thought about the people who had helped her along the way. She had never done it alone. Her crew, the talented actors, and the people who had believed in her were all part of her success. But the most unexpected and rewarding part of the journey had been her relationship with Graham. She remembered the first day they met on set. He had been unsure of her, maybe even a little skeptical. But over time, he had come to respect her, and she had learned to understand him. Their working relationship had grown from tension to trust. He had given an incredible performance, one that had surprised even him. And in the process, Naomi had seen a different side of the man who had once brushed her off with arrogance. They had both learned something about themselves, about growth, redemption, and the power of second chances. Naomi smiled as she thought about the moment after the premiere when Graham had congratulated her. It hadn't just been a compliment. It had been a recognition of everything she had accomplished. He had come to see her not just as a director, but as an equal. In that moment, Naomi knew that the respect she had earned was not only from her colleagues and critics, but from the very person who had once dismissed her. Now, Naomi had become an inspiration for others. She received messages from young filmmakers, especially women of color, who told her that her success had shown them what was possible. She had broken through barriers that others had said were too high to climb, and she was determined to keep pushing forward, to keep telling stories that mattered. As she stood on the balcony, Naomi's phone buzzed in her pocket. She reached for it and saw that it was a message from the studio. They wanted to meet with her the next day to discuss her next project. It was a big opportunity, one that could change everything once again. Naomi felt the familiar excitement of new challenges ahead. But as she looked out at the city, she realized something important. She wasn't just excited about the projects to come. She was excited because she had found her voice. She had shown the world who she was, and she wasn't going to stop now. Naomi's triumph wasn't just about making a successful film or landing new deals. It was about proving to herself and to everyone else that dreams, no matter how big, could come true with hard work, determination, and belief. She had overcome every obstacle, faced her fears, and come out stronger. And as the night sky stretched out before her, Naomi knew that her journey was far from over. The future was wide open, and she was ready to take on whatever came next.